Ma'am, we have an unidentified object at the edge of the system and coming toward us. Hermione Thornton, the station master, put down her paperwork and walked over to the voxel operator's station. A large blip was marked, heading towards the center of the system. All right, keep an eye on it. Could just be a stray asteroid. If it gets too close, we'll notify the mining operation and see if they can't shift its trajectory. Yes, ma'am, the operator answered, returning to his screens. She had barely gotten back to her desk before he called out again, this time with a hint of worry in his voice. Ma'am, the object is accelerating. Collision course with the station in 10 minutes. Ops, bring it up on screen, she said. If it was accelerating, it had to be a ship. However, a ship should have had a beacon on it, marking it on the voxel detector. The main view screen sprang to life, and the stars spun momentarily as the camera panned toward that part of the system. In the center of the screen was something that almost looked like an asteroid. It was oval-shaped and pockmarked with holes all over, but clearly visible were the exhaust plumes of multiple thrusters pointed in every direction. No ship I've ever seen, Hermione muttered. Then she ordered, try hailing it. The signalman typed in commands, then depressed the transmit button. Unidentified vessel approaching Crescent Station. Please heave to and identify yourself. There was a long pause before he adjusted the frequency and repeated his message. I'm getting feedback, he said, like they're receiving, but no response. They've sped up, warned Ops. Hermione glanced at the screen and saw they had indeed sped up, and were now pointed directly at the station. Call them again. Warn them if they don't heave to, we will lock them in the tractor beam, she told the signalman. Ops, get ready to lock them up. If they get closer than 1,000 kilometers, I want you to hold them there until we can get somebody to board and investigate. Roger that, Ops answered. Hermione watched the vessel on screen as it came closer, heedless of the signalman's warnings. Ops, can you decrease the magnification? She asked. That's not magnified, Ops answered. The vessel was huge, Hermione realized. It must be close to a quarter of the size of the station. Several civilian vessels doing their normal routines could be seen as small specks on the screen, much closer to the station's cameras. Voxel, how far out are they? Hermione was beginning to worry the vessel would be a hazard to traffic around the station. Just under 1,500 kilometers, the Voxel operator reported. Suddenly, a blood-red beam lanced across the screen and the station shook. Decompression alarms sounded, and Hermione grabbed hold of the nearest desk to steady herself. What happened? Damage report. The vessel just destroyed our tractor beam, reported OPS. Some sort of energy lance. It went straight through the station. Decks 4248 are damaged, but the pressure doors are sealed. Hermione turned to the signalman. Send out a mayday! Warn civilian craft to get away from the station and leave the system if they can. The signalman nodded, white-faced and shaking. He mashed down on the emergency transmit button. Mayday! 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 Crescent Station is under attack from an unknown vessel. All civilian craft evacuate the system immediately. Mayday! 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 There was a moment's silence. Then the communication speakers exploded in a jabber of confused, scared ship captains. Hermione tried to drown it out, focusing on what needed to be done to manage the damage to the station. On screen, a fixture on the hostile vessel that had looked like an antenna glowed red. Then a beam shot out and ran the length of a nearby cargo ship that was endeavoring to leave the station. Hermione felt her stomach clench as she watched the ship split open, and all its cargo, atmosphere, and crew disperse into the cold vacuum of space. Then there was a squelch over the communication speakers, and the firm, authoritative voice of a naval officer came through the speakers. This is the 7th Task Force. We are en route to render assistance. ETA is 8 minutes. The speakers squelched again, signaling the end of the transmission. In 8 minutes, all they'll find is debris and bodies, Hermione thought, as she watched the hostile vessel fire again. This time, it vaporized a small surface shuttle that was trying to flee into the planet's atmosphere. There was nothing they could do but watch the carnage. The jabber of civilian captains was squelched again, and this time, a happy Yankee drawl came through the speakers. This is PDF vessel Icarus. We are engaging the enemy. As the speakers squelched off, the small frigate zipped into view on the top of the station's screen. Its thrusters were clearly on afterburners as it headed straight towards the hostile behemoth. Captain Sigil was the local planetary defense force leader. The gallant fool is going to try and save the station, Hermione thought, as she raced to the signal station and mashed down the transmit button. Captain Sigil, that ship is 100 times your size. You don't have a chance. She released the button, leaning on the desk as she watched the frigate continue undaunted on the view screen. Captain Sigil's happy drawl returned over the speakers. You focus on getting those civvies to safety. We'll buy you some time. Then, as if he were giving orders at a yearly drill, she heard him say, "Fire our railgun at that guy's stinger." In the background, they heard the weapons officer answer, "Aye, aye," and on the screen a blue flash signified the launch of the projectile. The hostile vessel's thrusters burned brighter as it turned toward the little frigate. Hermione mashed down the transmit button again. "You've got their attention. Now get out of there. That's an order," she almost begged. She saw the signalman shaking his head even before she lifted her hand off the button and knew what he was about to say. "He can't hear you. He's still got his mic open, and because he's a military vessel, he's squelching all other traffic in the system." The brave, gallant fool knew exactly what he was doing, Hermione thought. With his mic open, he was preventing the civilian pilots from panicking over the communication system and spreading their panic to others. This way, pilots would be forced to focus on the task of finding their own way to the edge of the system, instead of sitting in a blind panic waiting for instructions. She stood up slowly, tears coming to her eyes as the captain's calm voice returned over the speakers. "I don't think we'll have enough time for another one of those," the captain drawled, as if discussing whether to have another helping at dinner. "Navigation! Spin us around to give our guns the best possible angle and keep us there. Guns! Give 'em hell!" The control room watched, magnifying the screen as the little frigate spun until all 8 of her autocannons were pointed towards the enemy. All 8 barrels began blinking at 3 flashes per second as they poured what ammunition they had into their enormous adversary. The hostile vessel turned, its firing antenna glowing red until it was pointed at Icarus. Then it fired. The control room gasped in unison as the little frigate was cut in half amidships, her thrusters dying out quickly as the fuel was vented into space. The speakers squelched as the transmission finally ended. Tears began to run down Hermione's cheeks, but she couldn't look away. Even though the ship was crippled, most of the autocannons continued to fire. Their militia crews, locked in pressurized compartments, were determined to keep the enemy's attention as long as they could. The hostile ship turned and fired again and again until the last autocannon stopped firing. Then it swung back towards the station, its weapon powering up again. Hermione shook herself, releasing the white-knuckled hold she'd had on the nearest chairback. She looked over at the voxel screen. All the civilian ships had either made it to the edge of the system or had already jumped. They were the only target left before the colony on the planet S surface. If this was it, so be it. "Ops," she said, a little shakily. "Sound the decompression alarm and lock down all the bulkheads. Let's make it as hard to take us apart as possible." Ops, a retired Navy man, nodded silently and gave her a salute. As the decompression alarm sounded again, a wave of static covered the screens momentarily. When it passed, the control room erupted in a cheer. There, between the station and the hostile vessel, were 2 Navy battlecruisers from the 7th Task Force. As Hermione watched, their massive artillery turrets turned towards the hostile ship and flung red-hot projectiles towards its nose. Hermione smiled and said a silent prayer of thanks. The sacrifice of Captain Sigil and the 56 brave militia men and women of his crew had saved them. Captain Terrence Johnson was shocked by the size of the alien vessel attacking Crescent Station. They had been monitoring the communications from the system since the Mayday call, but he had dismissed the station master's description of the enemy vessel as panic-induced exaggeration. Now, seeing the immense ovoid vessel nearly filling his forward view screen, he had to admit it was as large, if not larger, than the station master had estimated. The alien vessel was easily twice as large as his battlecruiser, and possibly larger in total mass than both his battlecruiser and her sister ship, Achilles, holding station 5 kilometers to port. His battlecruiser, Ajax, was one of the newest in the fleet, and had been assigned to 7th Task Force with Achilles as part of an increase in anti-capital ship capability, focused on the outer sectors of United Earth Alliance space. Many had questioned the need for a dozen battlecruisers, pointing out that humanity had not encountered any alien life in the galaxy so far, and the further they expanded without encountering other intelligent life, the less likely it was they would ever find it. Now, Captain Johnson was very grateful the UEA Senate had voted to approve the construction of the massive warships. At a kilometer long, 250 meters tall, and 200 meters wide, Ajax and her sister ships were the largest gunboats in the UEA Navy. They boasted 15 heavy artillery turrets mounted on their sides and top, along with 21 secondary turrets and 24-point defense Gatling turrets spaced out along all 4 of the battlecruiser's long sides. A railgun ran along half the length of the battlecruiser's ventral spine, giving them the capability to shatter any freighter or warships known to the UEA. Additionally, on sides of the hull were 2 banks of 12 missile bays holding Phantom missiles with high explosive-shaped charge warheads. and 2 dorsally mounted Medusa multiple vehicle nuclear warhead missile bays. They were humanity's ultimate ship killers. Captain Johnson watched as the first artillery salvo, fired as soon as the FTL static had cleared from the turret operator's targeting screens, impacted across the alien vessel's rounded prow. 10 flashes marked where the shells struck the alien vessel, followed closely by 10 more from Achilles. They seemed to have no effect on the alien vessel, as it turned ponderously to point an antenna-like appendage sticking out of the prow in the direction of Ajax. A red lance of energy burst from the alien vessel towards Ajax, and Captain Johnson felt a slight tremor as the energy lance hit his battlecruiser. Energy weapons? He thought. The United Earth Alliance doesn't have anything like that. This changes the situation. Damage report, he demanded. Atmosphere loss on Deck 30, reported Elt Ashley Lee, the damage control officer. She pressed her headset against her ear for a minute before adding, "Hit was 1 deck above the primary reactor room. Emergency bulkheads have sealed off the damaged compartment. Reactor still online and operating at 100%. No casualties reported. It went through 2.5 meters of heavy armor plate? Wait, just above the reactor room? Are the alien sensors sensitive enough to pinpoint our reactors through the hull?" Captain Johnson worried. "Send a warning to Achilles. That might have been targeted at the reactor." "Guns," he ordered. "Concentrate all weapons on the enemy S energy projector. Green light on all ordnance." "Aye, aye, sir," replied the weapons officer, Mark Werner, firmly. Then Werner spoke into his headset, relaying the orders. "All weapons, focus fire on enemy energy projector. Fire all Phantom missiles. Calculate firing trajectories for Medusa missiles." Captain Johnson knew that for Werner, as well as himself, this fight was personal. Both of them had served alongside Captain Sigil in the Separationist War only 10 years before. They had listened to his last transmission, desperately willing their battlecruiser to go faster, and feeling his loss as keenly as if they had watched it happen in person. Now, Werner spoke with cold fury, as if he were personally going to avenge Captain Sigil's death. Captain Johnson knew that green-lighting the use of the Medusa missiles would be controversial. Their nuclear payloads were supposed to be able to cripple a UEA Navy supercarrier, which was probably close in dimensions to the alien vessel. But there were some who believed the nuclear payloads were too powerful and should be removed from the UEA Navy arsenal. The artillery turrets spat another salvo of armor-piercing shells at the alien vessel. Capt. Johnson noted the salvo had taken a few seconds longer than the first two, and was pleased to see most of the armor-piercing slugs slam directly into the alien S energy weapon. The others were near misses, close enough so the plume of fire from their explosive charges licked at the base of the alien weapon. Moments later, a salvo from Achilles landed on and around the alien weapon. Despite the pounding, the alien energy weapon glowed red and fired. This time, it targeted Achilles. "Maybe they can detect the reactor," Captain Johnson mused, "or they could believe their sensors are off." "Helm," he ordered. "Bring us in closer." The helmsman, Ensign Adrian Wheelman, responded, "Aye, aye, sir." Turning to Altot Werner, Captain Johnson continued, "Warm up the railgun." "Aye, sir," answered Werner. Railgun capacitors charging at 10% per minute. The fact the antenna-looking energy weapon had sustained more than a dozen direct hits from the artillery turrets worried Captain Johnson. He didn't know if they were doing any damage, or how many more projectiles they would have to use to disable it. He could use the nukes. However, the nukes would only be effective if they could reach the target. Capt. Johnson didn't know if the alien vessel had a point defense system, but it would be foolish to assume they didn't. He wouldn't know how effective the alien point defense was until the Phantom missiles were within contact distance of the target. The railgun mounted along the battlecruiser's spine could do the most damage. However, lining up a railgun shot would mean turning so most of his kinetic weapons would not have a firing arc on the enemy vessel, and it took a long time to charge. The view screens sparkled momentarily with static, and the voxel operator, Ensign Arabella Hunley, reported that the rest of 7th Task Force had arrived. The supercarrier Hermes, along with a half-dozen destroyers and frigates, had dropped out of FTL near Crescent Station, and the destroyers and frigates immediately began deploying into a skirmish line between Hermes and the alien vessel. On normal peacekeeping and anti-piracy patrols, Hermes was the workhorse of the task force. With 1,002 seat strike craft and an entire Marine division on board, Hermes could deal with any unrest in United Earth Alliance space. Here, however, she would most likely be a gigantic punching bag. The supercarriers were just that, carriers. They had minimal armor and no long-range weapons, relying instead on their escorts to protect them against significant anti-ship threats. Hermes was the flagship, however, and shortly after it arrived in system, the Ajax's communications officer, Lot Koike Sawao, told Cap Johnson there was a priority hail from Hermes. "Put it on my terminal," Cap Johnson ordered, and a second later, the lean face of Rear Admiral Willis Vong appeared on the screen of his station. "What's the situation, Johnson?" Rear Admiral Vong asked. "The enemy is using some sort of energy weapon, sir. The enemy has fired once at us and once at Achilles so far. It burned straight through our battle armor, one level above our main reactor. We are engaging with everything we have," Capt. Johnson replied, his artillery turrets firing another salvo as he spoke. "We have scored several direct hits, but the enemy weapon is still operational. Phantom missiles have been launched, and I've ordered the Medusa missiles prepped. I believe the enemy might be able to detect the energy signature of our reactor through the hull." As he finished speaking, Ajax's secondary battery began a rolling barrage as they closed to within effective range. Rear Admiral Vong looked surprised. "Energy weapons," he mused aloud. Then he nodded thoughtfully. "Very well. Keep up the pressure, but hold off on launching the Medusas," he said. "I'll have Hermes launch her strike craft in case we need them." "Aye, aye, sir," Cap Johnson replied. The transmission ended, and he turned his attention back to the main screen in time to see the alien vessel fire again. Once again, the energy lance was aimed at Achilles, and Cap Johnson wondered what damage they were taking. "Bring up Achilles on the secondary view screen," he ordered. If the alien vessel was successful at disabling Achilles, he would need to change his strategy. The secondary view screen blinked and showed an image of Achilles, at least most of Achilles. Their sister ship was in such close formation that they couldn't see all of her kilometer-long hull. They could see 2 artillery turrets that had been slagged by the alien energy weapon, but all of her other primary and secondary turrets were still pouring fire at the alien vessel. It appeared the aliens were attempting to defang Achilles, 1 turret at a time. "Sir, Phantom missiles are 10 seconds from impact," Lot Werner reported. Cap Johnson turned his attention back to the main view screen just in time to see tiny flashes of light sparkle all over the pockmarked hull of the alien vessel. Missiles began popping like tiny firecrackers before they made contact with the alien hull, as the alien point defense weapons, presumably energy-based, began taking them out. However, some missiles made it through, and large explosions appeared on the alien vessel's hull. "How many missiles hit?" Cap Johnson asked. The number of explosions looked depressingly small, but he rationalized that the size of the enemy vessel might make the number of missile explosions seem fewer than they actually were. "Looks like about a third got through," reported Lot Werner, disappointment evident in his voice. "Phantom missile bays will be reloaded in 30 seconds. A third, thought Cap Johnson. That was still a sizable number, since each Phantom missile bay held 6 missiles and Ajax had 24 missile bays. But probably not enough to do any meaningful damage, and there was no way the Medusas would make it through that kind of point defense if they ever got clearance to launch them. "How much damage did they do?" he asked, not really expecting a firm answer. "Difficult to say, sir," sensor operator Lot William Taft answered. "However, I think we may have breached their hull in a couple places. I can tell through all the residue from the Phantoms. We did knock out a few point defense weapons, though. What about that energy lance?" Cap Johnson asked. It was almost impossible to see it now under the constant barrage of artillery and secondary shells. "I'm still getting strong energy readings," began Lot Taft. He was cut off mid-sentence as the energy weapon fired through the explosions. The blood-red energy lance came directly at Ajax, and anyone looking at the view screen instinctively ducked. The battlecruiser shook violently, and alarms started blaring. Before Cap Johnson could demand a damage report, Lot Werner shouted, "Direct hit to the missile bays!" 4 port bays are destroyed, and the rest of the port missile bays are offline. LT Lee cut in. "Atmosphere loss on deck 50. Secondary explosions are threatening to breach decks above and below. Major casualties reported. Engineering reports that thrusters in that area are losing power. Sound decompression alarms throughout the ship. Then seal and vent the damaged section," ordered Cap Johnson. The breached missile bays would vent the atmosphere into space, but it might not do it quickly enough to prevent the explosions from igniting the fuel of the undamaged missiles. He prayed that any crew left alive in the missile bays and surrounding compartments would be able to get to emergency suits in time, but he couldn't wait. If all the missiles in the port missile bays exploded, it would doom Ajax, tearing her apart from the inside. "Helm, evasive maneuvers! Get us out of the firing arc of that energy weapon," he continued. "Aye, aye, sir," Elliot Lee and EN's wheelman shouted in unison. "Sir, Achilles and Hermes are requesting our status, sir," Lot Sawau reported. "Tell them we're hurt, but still combat capable," ordered Cap Johnson, holding onto his terminal as EN's wheelman put Ajax into an evasive maneuver. Lot Sawau nodded and transmitted the information. He listened a few seconds, then reported, "Achilles is recommending we break off while they cover us. They suggest we circle out of the action and line up a railgun shot. The suggestion was a good one. Ajax would essentially be feigning a retreat, only to come back and fire her most powerful weapon at the alien vessel. The problem was, the maneuver would leave Ajax's stern facing the enemy, allowing the possibility of taking fire in her sensitive engineering sections. It would also leave Achilles facing the alien alone for a few minutes, while the majority of Ajax's turrets would be unable to offer supporting fire, and Achilles was already missing 2 artillery turrets. If the enemy thought they had crippled or destroyed Ajax, they might try to duplicate the strike on Achilles. Cap Johnson decided to do a maneuver that was only partially what Achilles was suggesting. "Helm," he ordered. "Take us hard down and starboard. All ahead full for 30 seconds, then rotate and point the railgun at the enemy energy weapon." He turned to Lut Sawau. "Tell Achilles we are going to break out of their firing arc, then line up a railgun shot, but we will stay close to support them with our turrets." Ili Sawau and Ian's wheelman both responded, "Aye, aye!" A moment later, Cap Johnson gripped his terminal tighter as Ajax turned rapidly. The turn wasn't as hard as he expected, but he figured that might be because of the damaged thrusters. The constant fusillade of turret fire could be felt through the deck of the battlecruiser as the inertial dampeners struggled to keep up with the maneuver. The camera also struggled to keep the alien vessel centered on the view screen until the 30 seconds were up, and Ian's wheelman spun the battlecruiser about to point at the prow of the alien vessel. The sudden maneuver threw off the accuracy of the turrets, and when the camera finally steadied on the alien's weapon, Cap Johnson could see it beginning to glow with another charge. It was aimed at Achilles, and Cap Johnson knew he didn't have much time to act before it fired. The aliens had targeted 2 important areas on his battlecruiser and had nearly knocked him out of the battle with the hit to the missile bays. If they got a lucky hit on Achilles, they could destroy her the way they had almost destroyed Ajax. "Guns!" he barked. "Get a firing solution for the railgun and punch that SOB in the nose." "Aye, aye," replied Lutwerner aggressively. His fingers flew over his keyboard, and seconds later he reported, "Firing solution locked! Firing!" Ajax bucked as the 10-meter-long projectile was flung at a fraction of light speed toward the alien vessel. At first, Cap Johnson thought they had missed as he followed the electric blue projectile towards the target. However, in a moment, he saw that he had misjudged Lutwerner. The railgun's sabot punched into the base of the alien energy weapon at an angle, and the antenna-shaped energy projector shattered just as it fired towards Achilles. The energy lance that flashed out was smaller than the others, but it still slagged yet another turret. After the energy weapon shattered the alien vessel, its ponderous mass accelerated, closing on Achilles. "Are they trying to ram her?" Cap Johnson wondered. "Guns! Fire on the thrusters!" he ordered. The slow rate of acceleration made it seem unlikely, but the alien vessel might also be trying to close the distance to point defense range. If that was the case, Achilles would have to worry about several dozen energy weapons, and Cap Johnson didn't want to see if the battlecruiser's armor stood up to that kind of bombardment. Before Lutwerner could reply, Lut Sawau spoke up. "Captain, priority transmission from Hermes. All ships open fire on point defense weapons. Achilles is assigned to the upper half of the alien S-hull. We have been assigned the lower half. Strike craft and boarding shuttles launched from Hermes are forming up behind the screening escorts." "Very well," replied Cap Johnson. "Guns, target any point defense weapons you can find on their lower hull. Helm, take us to just outside their point defense range. I want to get the maximum number of turrets firing as possible." A chorus of "Aye, aye" followed his orders, and Ajax accelerated again, this time rapidly closing with the alien vessel. The alien vessel seemed intent on ramming Achilles, and the battlecruiser maneuvered hard to avoid the collision. Captain Johnson thought it was almost laughable as Achilles easily outmaneuvered the giant alien vessel. Then his attention was drawn to the approaching small craft. 3 waves of strike craft rocketed forward between Ajax and Achilles, their fixed autocannons strafing the hull of the alien vessel as soon as they got within range. Point defense weapons on the alien vessel started firing back, and Captain Johnson winced as multiple strike craft disappeared in red-orange puffs of exploding fuel. Behind the strike craft, 6 groups of boarding shuttles slowly closed on the alien vessel. The Marines were taking the battle to the enemy,